Sage Wanderer here, coming at you from my cabin down by the creek. So today I have to talk about the elephant in the room. I have to talk about the conviction of Donald Trump on 34 felony convictions. Now, this case started out with people on the right saying, it'll never go to court. It's made up, trumped up charges. Well, it went to court. Then they said they'll never get a conviction. There's no way that they can convict him of this. They're rigging the system against him, and it's no way is this going to stand. And then, of course, he got convicted yesterday by a jury of his peers, and he was gag ordered to even talk about it. Still is under a gag order. They violated his First Amendment rights, and now, during the trial, people were saying it's going to be a hung jury. I'm here to tell you, you need to wake up and smell the coffee. It's time for a wake-up call, America. You need to see what's really going on in your nation. Quit being a Pollyanna. Quit thinking the cavalry's going to rush in and save us. It's not going to happen. They're doing this to Donald Trump, and they're going to continue doing it, and they're going to get away with it. The question is, what are you going to do about it? The question is, are we going to lay down and take this? So people are saying during the trial, they were saying this is going to end in a hung jury. Pollyanna, 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 rose-colored glasses. It did not end in a hung jury. Now people are saying, well, they're not going to sentence him to actual jail time. Maybe they'll give him house arrest or probation or community service, because they're basing their ideas on what they know to be normal. Normally, in a situation like Donald Trump found himself in, the falsification of business records, if he were not Donald Trump, if he were any other businessman in New York, if they even decided to prosecute him over these minor violations, which are misdemeanors more than 7 years old, way past the statute of limitations, if they were going to try and do this, they would first offer them a plea deal. Plead guilty to a misdemeanor and we'll drop the felonies. It happens every day. It happens every day in every court in this great land. Every day in every court, they're offered a plea deal to avoid the messiness of a trial and the risk of it. Donald Trump was never offered a plea deal to plead guilty to minor misdemeanor counts of falsifying records. Instead, he was prosecuted to the full extent of the law. The judge was biased from the get-go. The prosecutor, the DA who was behind this, Bragg, he was standing at his press conference when they announced the verdict, and right over his shoulder was the former number 3 guy at the Department of Justice, the guy who also went after Bannon. He left the Department of Justice just to join Bragg to come after Donald Trump. There are so many connections between Bragg and the Biden administration that if you think Biden's not behind this prosecution of Donald Trump, then I'm sorry, your intelligence level is so low you should tune out now, because you won't understand most of what I'm trying to tell you. You're a blooming idiot if you believe there's no connection. Biden even has a press conference when the jury is sent out to deliberate on the steps of the courthouse, where a accused criminal, that's all I'm going to say, in the form of Robert De Niro, made a fool of himself on behalf of the Biden administration. And this is clearly political persecution. It's clearly the left's attempt to change the election, to rig the election. They can't win at the ballot box, so they're coming after him with these trumped up charges. Where did it start? What can we do about it? What do we have to compare it to in history? Well, I wouldn't be able to label myself a sage, a wise man, if I refuse to accept historical evidence. So how did our grandfathers handle political corruption? How did our grandfathers handle rigged elections? How did our grandfathers handle the weaponization of the legal system against people to persecute them? How did they handle it? Well, I offer you a story from our past. I'm not saying that's what we should do, but I am saying if we don't learn from history, we're never going to learn. And I wouldn't be a sage if I didn't offer you this lesson from history. In the 1930s, a crime boss, a political crime boss in the state of Tennessee, put together a group of politically corrupt politicians to control the state of Tennessee. They called him the boss. He was the head of a political machine. Ironically, Boss Hogg from the ridiculous 70s and 80s TV show Dukes of Hazzard was based in part on this character from the past in the state of Tennessee. And he got elected sheriffs so that he could have more control. He could collect more graft. He could line his pockets more deeply. He could get his way politically. And in a place called McMinn County, the city of Athens, Tennessee, he got elected a sheriff who was very, very corrupt. This was right before World War II broke out. Then all of the able-bodied young men went away to fight World War II. Many of them just boys when they left. They went there, they survived the greatest war the world has ever seen. While they were in country, while they were fighting against fascism in foreign countries, fascism was taking over their community in McMinn County. And they began to receive letters from their family that they were being persecuted by a corrupt sheriff in McMinn County. So what the persecution looked like? Well, the first thing he did was hire a ridiculous number of new deputies, more than the county ever needed. And instead of paying them a salary with a salary cap, he paid them for every arrest. So they were arresting people on trumped up charges to line their pockets. The more people they arrested on bogus charges, on made up charges, on anything they could stick, the more money they got in their pocket, right? And so people were fined hundreds of dollars for minor things. They were threatened with jail. They were put in jail. And letters of this situation started to be sent to these boys who were fighting for freedom in foreign countries for the United States during World War II. And many of them couldn't wait to get home to put a stop to it. So one in particular comes home on leave, on furlough, and he witnesses firsthand how out of control McMinn County law enforcement has become, how rigged the the judicial system in that county had become, how corrupt the government had become. And he went toe-to-toe with it, and the result was he was gunned down in cold blood. This news got back to the boys who were fighting for their country in foreign lands. And when the end of World War II happened, in 1946, these boys started coming home just in time for the 1946 election in McMinn County. Now, the corrupt government, the sheriff there and the crime boss over Tennessee, knew that these men weren't happy. He knew that they were going to present a problem for him. He'd had free reign of the entire county there, this sheriff, because all of the fighting age men were gone, and he was just persecuting old people and the very young. That was all that was left there. Lining his pockets by robbing from them with these false accusations and these trumped up charges, not unlike what we're seeing today happening in our federal courts, in our state courts, and even in our local courts. That political corruption has corrupted the entire judicial system from top to bottom, even in local areas. So when these young men were faced with coming home to this, they were ready to utilize democracy to take control of their town and their county. Some 3,000 of them were beginning to return from war in World War II in 1946. And when the buses full of them pulled up to let them out of town, the corrupt sheriff sent deputies to write them all tickets for public drunkenness, whether they'd been drinking or not. Before they even got off the bus, they got off to, here's your ticket, here's your ticket, here's your ticket. And the thing is, they were getting what's called muster pay. So when people leave the military and leave combat, they get a lump sum to start their life. So this corrupt sheriff knew these people coming off had money, right? He wasn't robbing from poor people. He was robbing from people who actually had a handful of cash. So he wrote them all these tickets. Of course, they didn't fight back. The young men took it in stride because they intended to use the political system of the United States to win back their county in a regular election. And they started the GI Party. The GI Party put up candidates for every public office, both Republican and Democrat, because they weren't about Republican or Democrat. They were about doing away with this political corruption, doing away with this broken system, and reclaiming their county. When election day grew near, they sent out, the GI Party sent out armed, legally armed individuals as poll watchers. Well, an elderly black man was coming to vote, and one of the things that the corrupt sheriff would do at elections is that he would let people who were from other counties, people that were too young, anybody that could vote, that would vote for his corrupt regime, he would let in to vote. And those he knew would vote against him, he would refuse to let them in. His deputies would bar their entrance into the polling place. And so a black man who was friendly to the GI movement went to vote, and a deputy sheriff hit him in the mouth with brass knuckles, severely injuring him. And one account says that he then tried to walk around the deputy sheriff and get into the polling place anyway. Others say he just turned and ran. But either way, the man was gunned down in cold blood in front of witnesses on election day, being shot in the back by a deputy sheriff. People that witnessed this were outraged. In another polling place, of course, they used that incident to snatch up the ballot box and take it to the county jail. The corrupt sheriff did, where it could be counted by the sheriff deputies, of course, and close that polling place. In another polling place, two of the poll watchers by the GI movement were arrested by a deputy sheriff and detained, so they couldn't participate in the poll watching, right? And the two of them knew the jig was up. They knew that this election was rigged. They knew the only reason they were doing all these things is that this sheriff was going to win re-election, and they didn't really care what the voters had to say about it. And so when the two poll watchers who were already under arrest on trumped-up charges saw that there were out-of-town news reporters on the front steps covering the election, they literally dove out of a window and escaped. At this point, a group of about 60 GIs decided that they were going to have to take control of the ballot boxes. They were going to have to take control of the counting, or this was just going to be an election, another rigged election for this dirty sheriff. So they went and broke into the armory, and they seized 60 bolt-action Enfield rifles in .30-06, which was the World War I rifle, but one that they, as World War II vets, were all well trained in the use of, along with 2 Thompson submachine guns and 2 bandoliers of ammunition for each rifle for each man. And the 60 armed men, armed with U.S. military weapons, laid siege to the jail where this ballot box had been taken. And they demanded that the sheriff and the sheriff's deputies come out with the ballot box and turn it over to them so the people could count it, because they knew that the election was being rigged inside at that moment, that they were going to once again just count all the ballots for the corrupt sheriff and chunk all the ones that were for the GIs. And when they refused to do that, the GIs opened fire on the city, on the county sheriff's office, the jail there. And a night-long battle ensued where shots were fired, hundreds and hundreds of shots were fired from both directions. At one point, an ambulance arrives and the GIs decide to be a good guy and let them take out their wounded to the hospital to be treated. But when the ambulance pulls up, it's not the hospital, it's not injured people that's going to the hospital. It's the corrupt sheriff who dives in the back of the ambulance and is allowed to escape because they let them bring an ambulance. And so he used an ambulance to escape from this situation. At one point, the dynamite was brought out, and sticks of dynamite were hurled at the jail. The front porch of the jail was completely blown off. And after breaching the front door with dynamite, the GIs went into the police station and took all of these corrupt deputy sheriffs under arrest, put them all under citizen's arrest. Then they counted the vote, and the vote showed, when it was all counted by the GIs and the people of McMinn County, that they had won a 2-1 victory, that more than 65% of the votes were for the GI candidates. And they knew they had to make this happen in one night, because the National Guard was on its way. They knew that if they didn't win that night, they would all go to prison. And they put their lives on the line. And looking back at the photos of some of these men is mind-boggling, because they look like high school kids. These men coming back from war had joined at 18, and now they were 22, 23-year-old men that still looked like they belonged in a high school yearbook. And they took their county back. They put their man in as sheriff, their veteran GI as sheriff, and they cleaned up that whole state, that whole county. And not only that, that caused a GI movement to happen throughout the entire state of Tennessee, and they elected GI veterans returning from war to key offices, and this boss hog character, this crime boss that had rigged and corrupted the election, was forced out along with all of his corrupted officials, and Tennessee was saved from this level of corruption. This incident goes down as the only successful armed insurrection in the history of the United States. This is how your grandfathers dealt with rigged elections. This is how your grandfathers dealt with law enforcement and judges and other members of the judicial system that were corrupt and obviously breaking the law and obviously hurting the people. And they took, literally by force, their county back. Now, I'm not suggesting this is how we handle our current situation, but I'm telling you that the level of corruption that was in McMinn County is now nationwide. And it's especially in local law enforcement in every blue state, in every blue region, in every blue city, even blue cities in red states. You're seeing this level of corruption. The election was rigged, and it's been rigged for a very long time. Let's go back in time. I believe that, with the exception of maybe Ronald Reagan, that every president since they assassinated John F. Kennedy was not elected, but selected. And that every single one of these national elections has been rigged since 1963, when they killed our president, who ironically got into office because the election was rigged. Let's go back in time and look at that. Remember, sages learn from the past, and they force you to remember the past so that we don't repeat the past. But in 1963, the mafia was at their pinnacle. They were pretty much in control of most major cities, especially in the East Coast. The young Las Vegas crime syndicate was taking off and prospering wonderfully. And they started to rig elections. They started to buy politicians on the local level, on the state level, and eventually the national level. So there happened to be two idealistic young brothers running for public office, putting themselves out as politicians. And whether they knew who their father was or not, do we really know our fathers? We know the side they show to us. But we know that Joe Kennedy, the parent to John F. Kennedy and to his brother, the Attorney General, Robert F. Kennedy, the father of RFK Jr., who's running in this election as well, that whether they knew their father had earned his fortune through smuggling bootleg liquor in from Canada on his sailboat and selling it to the mafia in the United States at huge profits, and that he made their family fortune by being part of syndicated crime. Whether they knew that or not is a question for history. But I will say this: they clearly did not know that the election had been rigged on their behalf. That John F. Kennedy became president because the mafia wanted him to be president. John F. Kennedy became president because Jim Daley, the mayor of Chicago, I believe, allowed dead people to vote for JFK. But when JFK and RFK became president and attorney general of the United States, they set out to take down syndicated crime, to take down these crime syndicates and the mafia as we know it. And they held hearings and they subpoenaed people and brought them in. And the mafia felt completely backstabbed because this was supposed to be their guy. The government did not choose JFK to be president. It was the mafia that chose him to be president. This is such a convoluted story. But nonetheless, what we appear to have in retrospect, when we look back in time, is the CIA working with LBJ, the vice president, and the mafia to assassinate our president. Since the assassination of John F. Kennedy, I don't believe there's been a single legit president, except for maybe 8 years of Ronald Reagan and 4 years of Donald Trump. And I think Reagan, the groundswell of support for him, the grassroots support for Ronald Reagan, was enough to outdo their cheating. And they lost 2 elections in a row to Ronald Reagan. But they had the fix in, because George H.W. Bush, former head of the CIA, a person definitely involved in the conspiracy to kill John F. Kennedy, was vice president to Ronald Reagan. So they had an ace in the hole. And when Reagan was done, they put their man in. And absolutely since that time, H.W. Bush, the first Bush Sr., since that moment until Donald Trump's election, every election was selected, not elected. That they've been using these methods to cheat. And then in 2020, they used mail-in ballots because of a pandemic that may or may not have been executed by the deep state, that may or may not have been engineered by the deep state. Nonetheless, this gave them the opportunity to rig the 2020 election. When the people of America stood up to it on January 6th, they were all hunted down and put in prison, put under the jail. When Donald Trump was running for president in 2016 against Hillary Clinton, she was seen as the poster child for government corruption. That the act of murdering somebody and making it look like an accident for political purposes, or making it look like a suicide for political purposes, actually got called arkancide. It's part of our lexicon now. They were arkancided. This has to do with the level of corruption that Hillary Clinton was accused of. And during a debate, she says, you can't let this unhinged Donald Trump become president and have access to the nuclear football. And Donald Trump interrupts her and says, yeah, you don't want me to be president, because if I was president, you'd be in jail. And the crowd chants, lock her up, lock her up. From that moment, they targeted Donald Trump to lock him up. That they just flipped it and went, okay, two can play at that game. You're going to lock me up. We're going to lock you up first. And then you got the Russian collusion hoax. Right? Then you got the January 6th hoax. Then you've got the tax return hoax. You've got the Steele dossier, PP-gate hoax. You've got lie upon lie, frame job upon frame job. They've gone after him. There's all of these indictments, and they finally get him on something that ought to be a misdemeanor, that should have been settled out of court, that should have been a fine and maybe some community service or some re-education on proper bookkeeping. That's what would have happened to a normal businessman. But because it was Donald Trump, now he's facing 32 felony convictions. Each one of those is punishable by up to 4 years in prison. It's up to the judge whether 4 times 32, which is 136 years, whether he's going to serve those consecutively, or whether there's going to be 4 years and then 4 years and then 4 years for 136 years locked up in prison, or whether he'll spend 1 4-year sentence. I'll tell you, if this was any other man in his 70s who was accused of a similar or convicted of a similar infringement, right, crime, that he would at most face probation. But in this circumstances, This is back to the Pollyanna thing. You guys have been Pollyanna in this from the get-go. You've been saying, oh, well, they'll never make these charges stick. They're ridiculous. And, oh, well, if they got him into court, but he's going to be exonerated. This is ridiculous. Oh, well, he got, it went to the jury. It's going to the jury, but the jury's somebody. One of them 12 people ought to know. I mean, surely one of these 12 people can see that this is rigging the election of 2024 by trying to imprison and convict the front runner because he's not authorized. He's not part of the deep state. He's not part of the club. That if you still believe that they went to all this trouble to finally get him into court, to finally get him before a jury, to finally get the jury to deliberate, to finally get the conviction that they sought, if you think they're going to treat him like any other businessman and give him probation, you're not hitting on all 8 cylinders, pal. If you think they went to all this trouble and they're not going to put Donald Trump in Rikers Island, I need what you're smoking. Because I'm here to tell you, they didn't go to all this trouble just to give him a slap on the wrist for the press of it, so they can say he was a convicted felon. They're going to put Donald Trump in jail. Now, there's nothing that prevents Donald Trump from winning the election from jail. And I heard Mark Dice say something that's completely false. He said, well, if that happens and Donald Trump becomes president, he just pardons himself and walks right out of jail. No, that'd be true if it was federal prison. That could happen if it was federal. This is a state charge. This is the state of New York. The state of New York, only person that can pardon somebody on state charges is the governor of New York. And we all know who Hokum is. We all know what a tyrant that one is. We all know what side she's on. If you think there's any chance that Donald Trump is going to walk away from this without spending the next 4 years in Rikers Island, I got a bridge to sell you in San Francisco, right? I got some oceanfront property in Arizona you might be interested in. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely ignorant to think that they went to this much trouble. The fake dossier, the PP-gate thing, the tax return attack, the all of this just like never ending, the Russian collusion hoax, right? The January 6th hoax, all of the other court cases that they tried to prosecute him on, all of the election interference, all of it that they took after him with everything they've got, and now they got a conviction. And if you think it's not going to end with him in jail on election day, I don't know what to tell you. You're obviously not operating in a hey, if I turn out to be wrong, if Donald Trump gets a little slap on the wrist and all they were working towards was the ability to call him a convicted felon, then I take it all back. I'd be happy for that to be the case. I'm just not that stupid. I don't see any way that they went to this much trouble, that they bent this many rules, that they worked diligently and tirelessly for the last 7 years to come after Trump on anything they could find on him, that they looked through his life with a fine-tooth comb. And they're going to let him walk when that judge now has all the power? He was given the power to put Trump potentially away for a 136-year sentence. That's what 4 times 32 is. Correct me if I'm wrong. Or 34. 4 times 34 is 136. They won. You think they're going to not do maximum damage? Now, I doubt whether they're going to have him serve these terms consecutively. They will probably be concurrent, which means all 32 will happen all 4-year sentences will happen simultaneously. So 4 years for all of it. But if you think he'll get less than 4 years, I highly doubt it. Why would they, after all they've done to make this happen? They pulled the wool over our eyes, and they blamed the assassination of John F. Kennedy on one unhinged person. They pulled the wool over our eyes in so many ways since then, from the Gulf of Tonkin to the weapons of mass destruction that didn't exist. And to think, and everything the Clintons got away with, the Clintons, the Clinton crime syndicate is a real thing. And also, we got this brain dead, clearly dimensional, suffering from dementia, this dementia patient we call a president. And somebody is pulling the strings because he's not capable. He can't take care of himself anymore. He can't make sense in statements. He can't even read a teleprompter. Excuse me, who is really running the country? Is it Hillary Clinton running the country? Is it Barack Obama running the country? Is it Nancy Pelosi running the country? Who is? Because Donald Trump is being targeted. Donald Trump is public enemy number one, and this entire system is working to get him. And it's hard for me to believe that dementia patient Joe Biden is the guy pulling the strings. Who's really in charge of our country? At what point do American citizens say enough is enough? What can we do? What should we do? What should we avoid doing? These are the questions now that must be asked. But I think if you're hoping that we're going to get a fair shake in the justice system, I think if you're hoping that our elections are valid and the will of the people is going to be seen and carried out, I think that you're naive at best, and maybe one of them at worst. Tell me what you think in the comments section. Feel free to comment about the past, the present, and the future of political corruption as it plays out before our very eyes. And we'll see you next time from my van down by the river. No, wait a minute. My shotgun shack in the Texas Outback. No, wait a minute. My cabin down by the creek. That's where I'm at now.